Heute hier gibt es ein Interview und auf dieses Interview habe ich mich ganz besonders gefreut. Und was das für ein Interview ist, jetzt gleich. So, warum habe ich mich so besonders auf dieses Interview gefreut? Weil ich durfte einer meiner persönlichen Börsenhelden, Börsenvorbilder interviewen. Ich habe das schon das ein oder andere Mal erzählt, als ich 1996 mit der Börse angefangen habe, und das ist ja nun schon ein paar Jahre her, war ich unter anderem einmal in Frankfurt auf einem Vortrag und da hat derjenige, mit dem ich heute gesprochen habe, nämlich Mobius, einen Vortrag gehalten. Wer jetzt jünger von euch ist, der wird ihn vielleicht gar nicht mehr so richtig kennen, denn Mobius war damals allerdings zu meiner Zeit war der ultimative Emerging Markets Gott. Anders kann man es einfach nicht bezeichnen. Er war wirklich der Emerging Markets Gott. Er hat milliardenschwere Investmentfonds für die Fondsgesellschaft Templeton damals verwaltet. Und er ist damals im Privatflugzeug um die Welt geflogen. Er hat uns, alle, die wir damals dabei waren, vor, wie lange ist das jetzt her, 27 Jahren gesagt, hey, schaut nach China. China wird das ganz große Ding für die nächsten 20 Jahre. Und ihr müsst euch vorstellen, heute weiß jeder, was China ist. Damals, vor 27 Jahren, da wusste man, was China ist, aber nicht, was das für eine wirtschaftliche Macht ist. Und wenn du heute jemanden fragst, der schon längere Zeit im Investment dabei ist und du sagst, hey, Mobius, sagt er, wow, diese Investmentlegende. Und ich habe das ganz große Glück, dass Mobius, der lange Zeit in Hongkong gelebt hat, in Singapur gelebt hat, dass der vor einem reichlichen Jahr hier nach Dubai gezogen ist. Und wie es der Zufall will, ist er auch noch zu mir in denselben Tower gezogen. Das heißt, wir sind quasi Nachbarn, wir treffen uns ab und an mal, wir gehen ab und an mal gemeinsam zum Essen und wir treffen uns vor allen Dingen sehr häufig im Gym, denn er geht jeden Früh, wenn er da ist, zum Training. Und da muss man jetzt dazu sagen, was ist da das Besondere? Der Mann ist 86 Jahre alt. So, jetzt wollte ich unbedingt mit ihm ein Interview machen, und weil er aber immer noch so wahnsinnig viel reist, er ist immer noch unglaublich viel unterwegs, weil er immer noch Investmentfonds managt, er hat eine eigene Beratungsfirma und glaubt mir, der macht das nicht mehr wegen Geld. Ne? Geld spielt da schon lange keine Rolle mehr. Und der Mann ist wirklich ein ultimatives Vorbild in allem, was er tut. Also ich bewundere ihn wirklich sehr. Wie gesagt, einer meiner großen Helden neben Warren und ein, zwei anderen, aber ist Mark definitiv ein großes Vorbild. Und so haben wir uns jetzt zu einem Interview verabredet. Und den einzigen Plot, den wir jetzt aber kriegen konnten, das war in New York. Das heißt, wir haben uns jetzt über Zoom in New York unterhalten. Und naja, wie es manchmal der Zukunft will, ne? Murphy's Law, seine Kamera ging nicht in New York. Und deswegen haben wir dieses Interview jetzt geführt, ohne dass man ihn sieht. Aber glaubt mir, er ist es. Und wir haben das Interview auf Englisch geführt und deswegen blenden wir euch hier die deutschen Untertitel ein. Ich habe ihn viele Sachen fragen können, wie er Deutschland sieht, weil er hat nämlich deutsche Vorfahren, wie er Europa sieht. Das wird einiges sehr überraschen, was er da gesagt hat. Wir haben natürlich über China gesprochen, wir haben über die Taiwan-Situation gesprochen, wir haben über Inflation gesprochen, wir haben über Emerging Markets allgemein gesprochen und am Ende hat er nochmal etwas super Spannendes gesagt, was er heute einem jungen Menschen raten würde. Und allein das schon würde es sich lohnen, nur diesen kleinen Ausschnitt sich anzuschauen. Ich empfehle euch aber dringend, schaut euch dieses Interview komplett an. Also holt euch einen Kaffee, holt euch einen Tee, von mir aus ein Bier oder ein Glas Wein, setzt euch hin, hört euch das ganz in Ruhe an, schaut euch das an. Es ist wirklich unglaublich wichtig, dass man von Menschen, der ist jetzt auch seit 60 Jahren ungefähr an der Börse, wenn man von Menschen, die so lange dabei sind, wenn man denen zuhören kann. Und da geht es nicht darum, dass sie sagen, kauf jetzt diese Aktie oder kauf jetzt jene Aktie, sondern hier muss man ein bisschen zwischen den Zeilen zuhören. Aber da kommt wirklich so viel Weisheit rüber, da kann man so viel daraus lernen, so dass das für mich persönlich eines der wichtigsten Videos hier auf diesem Kanal ist, auch wenn es vielleicht nicht von außen so ausschaut, vielleicht auch nicht so diese Riesenaufrufe bekommt wie viele andere, aber die von euch, die jetzt die Zeit nehmen, das anhören, ihr werdet nicht enttäuscht sein. Also viel Spaß jetzt mit dem Interview mit Mark und let's go. Okay, Mark, I know it's early in the morning and I don't want to waste your time, so let's start. And thanks again for your time. I really appreciate this.
Right.
Okay, Mark, let me start with maybe a little funny question, but Warren Buffett is getting 93 years this year. His partner, Charlie Munger, is 99 and you're also 86. Is this the key for a long, healthy life, to invest in the stock markets?
That's a good question. I think the key really is, to some extent it may be true in the sense that you keep your mind active. That helps, if you're active and you're willing to learn new things, which you have to do when you're in the stock market. I think it helps. But also, I think regular exercise and generally watching your diet and so forth is also important. I think you have to take care of your health generally. Your physical health is very, very important for your mental health, of course.
I told my viewers that every time you are here in Dubai and you go to the gym every day in the morning and you read, and so you do this, what you're talking about. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's very important every day because your body is meant to be used. There's an old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. So I think that's very important.
Yeah. Okay. Mark, you have roots in Germany. And so in the beginning, what do you think about Germany and the European economy right now?
Well, I think you have to go back to look at what's happened. I mean, the European Union has been an incredible success. And the euro, the currency, has also been an incredible success. It's a historic, amazing development. So I would say, generally speaking, I'm quite positive about Europe. Unfortunately, you had the Brexit problem, but I think eventually Britain really won't be able to stay away from Europe. There'll have to be some accommodation. And you can see more and more countries wanting to join the European Union. So I'm very positive on Europe generally. Despite the problems that we're having in Ukraine, you've got some technological successes in Europe. You've got incredible brains. So, of course, these are not emerging countries because the population age is higher and growth rates are necessarily lower. But still, Europe is very good and it's got some terrific companies.
So, and do you think we should still invest in Europe? The indices are in all-time highs, and there is still place to go for this. What do you think?
Yeah, I do. I think there's still room for growth. It's very important to remember that this is true of the U.S. as well, and practically any major market around the world. It no longer restricted to the country in which the market is located. So, for example, in Germany, if you look at Mercedes-Benz as one example, it's not a German company, it's a global company. They're manufacturing globally, they're selling globally, and it is true of so many other German companies. So, in some ways, these companies take advantage of the higher growth rate of emerging markets. So, nowadays, we're finding it more and more difficult to differentiate as to what is an emerging market company and what is not, because some of these multinationals are moving towards a situation where over 50% of their earnings are in emerging countries. So I think that's what you have to look at. When you look at European markets, look at those companies that are globally, they have global exposure, and thus are growing at a good pace as a result of this growth.
Yeah. In Europe, we have a higher inflation than in the US right now. You wrote a book about inflation. When you see what central banks are doing in the whole world, do you think they beat the inflation right now, or are we more in an area like the 70s that inflation will come back in a few months or maybe in 1 or 2 years?
Well, inflation is all about money supply. The higher the supply of money, the higher inflation will be. And if you look at the Europeans, they have been relatively careful about the money supply. Of course, during the COVID, they went, like the US, they had excessive money supply into the system. but now they're beginning to pull back. So I believe you'll see the inflation rate in Europe coming back just as it is in the US. US money supply growth has really come down dramatically. It takes time for the actual money supply to come down, but it is beginning to turn. So I think that same thing is true in Europe.
Okay, so do you think inflation will go down and then will rise again later, or?
It depends on what these governments, the central banks, do with their money supply. There is no reason at this stage why they would want to increase the money supply because we're not facing any COVID crisis or anything like that. And also, they're very concerned about inflation. So I think you're probably going to see these central banks pull back on money supply in order to control inflation. So I don't see that coming back anytime soon.
Okay. When I talk to people and tell them I will talk to you in an interview, everybody is saying, please ask Mr. Mobius about China. So let's talk a little bit about China. What are your general thoughts about China and the Chinese economy?
Well, you must remember that from an emerging market standpoint, China is extremely important because it represents maybe 30% of the market capitalization of all emerging markets. So you've got to be aware of this importance. However, there has been a number of changes that have taken place. One, of course, is the aging population because of the one-child policy that China pursued in the past. You're now having a situation where not enough young people are coming into the population, and the population is aging. So if you compare, for example, India and China, China's average age now is about 36. In India, it's about 26. So there's a big, big difference. So that's one thing you got to think about when you think about China. In other words, you're not going to see the 10% growth that we saw in the past,
Yeah.
and it'll be more moderate, single-digit growth. The second thing you've got to realize is that there's a very important political change taking place in China with a more centralized bureaucracy, stronger central government control, and also more control over the private sector. So it remains to be seen if this greater control by the Communist Party will result in less innovation and less entrepreneurial spirit. Because you must remember that the reason why China got where it is today is because it embraced a market economy. It allowed free enterprise to flourish. So you had companies like Alibaba, Tencent, and many of these other private companies with no state ownership become the largest companies in the country. And now the government is cracking down on these companies. So we have to ask the question, will we see this incredible entrepreneurial spirit in the future, under the current regime? So that's one question mark we have to look at very, very carefully. And of course, then there's the tension with the United States, which will not go away because Taiwan is so important to both the United States and China because of its ability to produce something like 80% of all the high-end semiconductors are produced in Taiwan. And both countries don't want to lose the opportunity because the Americans are trying to build their own plants in America, but it's very doubtful that they'll be able to duplicate what Taiwan has done. So that's another big question mark we have for China. Nevertheless, it's very important to keep an eye on Chinese companies to see if there are opportunities. We're invested in one company in Hong Kong, and we still continue to look for opportunities, but we have to keep in mind the things I've been just talking about.
You mentioned the Taiwan problem, and when I when I saw you the first time, this was in 1996, and you talked in this time. It's more than 25 years ago. You told us this was in Frankfurt, and you told us China will be the next big winner in the world, and nobody couldn't believe this at this time. So you know a lot of China, and you have a deep knowledge about this. From your standpoint, do you think there is a higher probability that we see a war with Taiwan, or do you think it's more than a war with words and no military decision?
Of course, nobody can predict such things, but my feeling is that the possibility of a hot war is definitely there, because you must listen to what the leadership of China says. They said that they want to take over China. They believe China is part of China. Taiwan is part of China.
Yeah.
And they definitely want to take Taiwan back. So, and on the other hand, the Americans say, no, we will not allow this to happen. And of course, then don't forget the Japanese. The Japanese have great interest in Taiwan as well. So I think it really depends on the leadership in China. If they decide to take military action, it could be very severe and damaging for the world, not only for these countries. So, but I would say you can't eliminate that possibility. I think there is a possibility, simply because the Chinese have clearly stated, if necessary, they will take military action.
Okay, let's talk about the emerging markets as a whole. When we see, let's say, the last decade, then the emerging markets as a whole underperformed the big markets like the US or the European markets. What do you think is the reason for this? Because we see so much population growing, we see they are getting richer, and they emerged as the name says. But why did they so underperform in the capital markets?
Well, when we look at underperformance, we're normally talking about the index. When people say,
Yes.
oh, the emerging markets underperform, they're looking at the index, MSC, usually the MSCI, emerging
Yes.
markets index. And the problem is that China represents 30% of that index. So when, as you know, China has been underperforming for quite some time, and that had a big impact on the index. So it looked like the emerging markets generally were doing poorly. But then if you look at India, India has been doing very well, outperforming, even in some cases, even outperforming the US market in dollar terms. So, but unfortunately, India is a much smaller component of the index. So I think that's really the story. That's what has happened. That you've had the major markets like China, and then of course Russia was 7% of the index, and of course overnight that market was wiped out. It actually disappeared. So I think combination of these things result in underperformance, but now we're seeing a change. China is beginning to recover to some extent, and India is coming up pretty rapidly.
Yeah, I think India, maybe the index is an all-time high, or
yes, yeah,
or near the all-time high.
Yeah.
When we talk about emerging markets, we talk about South America, Asia, Africa. From your knowledge and from your perspective, what are the interesting markets in the emerging markets right now?
Right now, the most interesting for us, I mean, if you look at our portfolio, you'll see Taiwan is right at the top. And many people are surprised and say, hey, what happens if Taiwan is attacked? But what we're doing is we're invested in the so-called fabulous companies. In other words, the companies that do not have a fabric, don't have a factory. These are the companies that are doing the software for the chips, for the semiconductors. Yeah. So if something happens, the whole staff can leave. very quickly. Their assets are basically people. So Taiwan is right at the top, followed by India and Korea. Korea, of course, is doing very well. High technology, higher and higher standard of living. And India is really the future because you've got 1.4 billion people that are moving at a very fast pace. Their growth rate this year will be about 7%, which is one of the highest in the world. Then we have bits and pieces in other parts of the world, like in Vietnam, in Kenya, in South Africa, in Turkey. And a lot of people are surprised that we're invested in places like Turkey because of the incredible devaluation of the currency. But we invest in companies that actually benefit from devaluations. So, for example, we have a software company in Turkey who export their software in dollar terms, and of course their costs are in local depreciated currency. So we're able to make good money in US dollar terms. But those are the places that we're looking at now.
Interesting. When we talk about emerging markets, we have to talk about also about commodities, because a lot of commodities are in the emerging markets. What do you think about commodities? We saw a big decline over the last decade, but and then with the Ukraine crisis, some of them are rising, then falling back. And what do you think if you take a longer view, maybe let's say the next 10 years? Are we back in a decade of commodities?
Well, there always will be a demand for commodities, no question about that. But the range and the emphasis of individual commodities will change according to the various conditions. For example, recently, a number of commodities have gone down, mainly because of demand from China has declined. But over the coming years, India will begin to pick up some of that demand as manufacturing transfers to India. And of course, in the energy sector, despite the fact that we're looking at more and more electric vehicles, petroleum will still be in demand for power, central power production, as they try to phase out coal. So I would say, yeah, there's opportunities in commodities. We don't like to invest in commodities directly, but we would go into, let's say, mining companies or companies that depend on commodities, who know how to buy and sell commodities in such a way that it's profitable. So yeah. There will be booms in various individual commodities as we go forward.
Before we come to an end, you live now in the United Arab Emirates, and you also know very well the Middle East. There are some people, they say the Middle East will be one of the best places in the next years. Is this only, do you think it's the same, or is this only for living, or is this only as an economic standpoint?
Well, I think if you look at what's happened in Dubai is sort of a template for the rest of the Middle East. The people in Dubai, the leadership in Dubai, realized that they couldn't depend on oil for the future, and they had to do something to create new wealth. And the way they did that, of course, is by building a very safe, attractive place for people to live with no tax or very little tax, and a very safe living environment, pleasant, safe and living environment. And I think that's going to be accelerated as we go forward. They're going to continue to attract more and more people. And of course, their emphasis is on attracting intelligent people who can bring new knowledge and new enterprise to the region. So I think it's a very interesting development. And you can see that Saudi Arabia would be a good example of a country that's looked at Dubai and realized that's the way they want to go themselves. So they're building new cities with the idea of attracting more and more talent, so forth. So it's going to be very interesting going forward. And I myself, as you know, I live in Dubai. I've made it my home.
Very, very good. Last question, Mark. When a young man or a young woman comes to you right now, let's say she is 20 years old, and asks you for one good advice for the future, for investing and for life, what would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them, first of all, start traveling. Start seeing the world as much as you can when you're young. Try to see as many countries, live in other countries as much as you can, particularly in Asia, but anywhere in the world, in Africa, in Latin America. So you learn more about how other people live, because it's a global community. That's one thing. The second thing is think of new technology and where your place fits in that new technology. Because as we go forward, technology will be driving the demand and the supply of almost everything. So the young people have to learn more and more about technology. Of course, many of them know more than we do at this stage with the internet and so forth. But the more they can learn about creating new technologies is really going to be the secret of the future. And that could be in any field. It can be in art, it can be manufacturing, it can be in publishing, it can be in automobiles, whatever. But it's technology that's going to be the key.
Perfect. Mark, I really appreciate that you give us your time and talk to us. Thank you very much. And hopefully we see us soon and we can do this again. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you again.